apply to our employees, and personnel rules would go through the assembly process, so there is a process that would be looked at.
So you'd be amending 3.3 though?
Yes.
Right, okay, and then that would come to the assembly.
And that's
So at
actually the
least-
next step in this
Okay.
process is the personnel rules.
Okay, so that does engage us. Okay, so at the risk of giving you one more piece of paper, after getting these in the email yesterday, I sat down and tried to sort out, because, you know, what I heard is the concerns and the question marks about what's it going to mean to people's paychecks. You know, am I going to be doing less money? So I just for your people's information, I attempted to sort it out. What I saw was still on the table for negotiation. What was previously negotiated is now going to become the employer's discretion within these guidelines we've discussed. So I just offer it to you if it helps as you're sorting it out. And any corrections I welcome, just because I'm trying to keep a menu.
And if you go to page 1 of 4 of the question and answers, the second one, what will be left to negotiate, lists all the things, wage scales, work rules, seniority, meal periods, leave accrual, premium, specialty, shift differential, pay enhancements, meal periods, hours of work, shift schedules, overtime eligibility, benefits, tool and clothing allowances, tuition reimbursement, union dues, definition of bargaining unit. So it fleshes out even further
Okay,
from
very
our
good.
conversation the other day.
Right. So anyway, so just offer that up. And that's it, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Flynn.
This is this table from you, Cheryl.
Yeah.
Also a question about the arbitration piece, and I just want to make sure I'm reading this new idea correctly. We're basically saying the arbitrator cannot blend the two last best officers, they pick one or the other. So we have a binary decision there. And then whatever the arbitrator decides comes to the assembly to either approve or disapprove.
Yes.
They don't get to pick. And then the mayor can either veto or not veto the assembly's decision.
Let me take it through the process.
And it has to be a supermajority.
The intent of having the full last best offer is to try to get an agreed contract, to get the parties closer, because when you're negotiating, preparing for arbitration with different categories within the LBOs, you know, you might leave one high saying, okay, the arbitrator's not going to go with me on that. I don't mind they're so bad, but then I can be real hard on this one. Having those different categories actually pulls the parties farther apart. So hopefully we come to an agreement. If we don't, the LBOs should be fairly close. The arbitrator picks between those two. The arbitrator's decision goes to the assembly. Obviously, if the assembly approves, that's by 8 votes. That's a veto-proof over majority. That's the contract. And again, and I would defer to Dennis, the charter says the mayor has a veto power until we change that. But that is effectively the process. And what that would allow is if we had a bargaining unit or an administration that took an extremely hard line that was way out of range and an arbitrator actually went with it, which is always a possibility, that then it comes to the assembly, the elected decision makers who are responsible for the budget, to just say, hey, we don't agree with that. Who are also responsible for our employees and their morale, and could say, we don't agree with that. But it makes it the public process. You can hear from the public, and it's done in a public manner.
But, I mean, it's more of a comment than a question. It seems like we've created a pretty steep hill if you do have an administration that's feeling particularly hard-headed about something. In order to overcome that, you basically have to get an arbitrator to go with you and then get 8 votes on the assembly. Otherwise, you're out of luck.
Well, that's the way it is now, like with the plumbers and pipe fitters. A
You have a
failure to get 8 votes.
administration, so no. But in that case, the arbitrator blended the LBOs,
Right.
and therefore it wasn't one side had we gotten 8 votes, one side getting everything or nothing, and now that's the way this is set up, and it seems like a pretty steep hill. Anyway, that's a comment. It's not a question, so it's probably not appropriate now. The other piece on the prohibition or the requirement that the union pay the city for their time, I think it's on page 7. and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in how the departments run themselves, but it's my understanding that, if an executive or a supervisor who's not in the bargaining unit is having difficulty with one of his or her employees, they will sometimes bring in a union representative to help sort it out. So are we saying that in that case, the union has to pay for that union representative to come in and help the supervisor?
That is the change in there, and what this is a balance of, in an ideal world, we have working shop stewards who are just come out, they're available to deal with a dispute, a question, whatever. It's no problem. On the other hand, we've got situations where we're paying half of an expensive employee's wage to essentially fight the administration. We do have situations where we have certain shop stewards who walk around City Hall all morning for no apparent purpose, but they're, quote, on union business. And it's been made very clear that the public would like union time to be paid for by the union and municipal business paid for by the municipality.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, obviously, if a bargaining team is made up of union representatives at the table, they're doing union business. I guess I'm concerned that by being quite as absolute as we appear to be here, it makes it pretty difficult for a supervisor to leverage his union resources, his or her union resources, to resolve a problem. We're saying, sorry, if you're there, you're paying for it, and they say, well, we're not paying for it. Now the supervisor's just sort of stuck. Right? I mean, is there a way around that? I mean, given what you've written here, is there a way around that you could somehow say, okay, in this case, the city's not paying, the city will pay for it? It seems like the answer is no.
I think the code language is clear. How it actually is done by the supervisors, we'll have to wait and see. I mean,
So we're advising supervisors to ignore the law?
right now, supposedly under most of our contracts, all the shop stewards are keeping track of their time. And to my knowledge, that's not happening anywhere.
Okay, I recognize the problem. I'm not sure we've come up with an artful solution. I'll leave it at that. That's all I have to ask you.
I want to make note that Mr. Birch, we assume with pink eye, has joined us on the phone.
We're glad he's not here.
Yeah, we're glad you're not here, Mr. Birch. And I will note, Ms. Gray Jackson, I do have you in the queue for a question. But currently my lineup is Ms. Osiander, Ms. Johnston, Mr. Trini, and then Ms. Gray Jackson. Ms. Osiander?
I'd like to elaborate a little bit on Patrick's last question, because when this was presented initially, my thought was, well, okay, sure, that makes sense if you're bargaining a contract. But then I met with some people who presented a scenario, well, if there's any kind of an investigation of an employee, they have a right to have a representative there, and so they'll pull in somebody else who's there. So if then the hours that they're pulled in are accounted for, then isn't it going to be an incredible Kronos nightmare to say, okay, we've got, I worked for 20.4, but 0.6 I was doing something else. I mean, if you get into that kind of detail, as I understand it, that happens frequently. I don't know if that's true.
I'll defer to Ms. Feely. I am blissfully ignorant of Kronos. This one.
Okay, well, I'm not asking a Kronos question. I'm asking a timekeeping reasonable.
There are codes that permit the time to be tracked while performing these functions that exist today.
Okay, so you could, it's not going to be any big problem for a regular salaried employee to take 15 minutes out of his daily reporting because he went in and did some, okay. All right, I want to go back to this scheduling and overtime thing, because it's really frustrating, because I'm hearing you say something and then I'm reading it and it doesn't tally with what you're saying.
Where are you?
Well, I'm several places. Right now, I'm on page 9. It says that it's a management ability to do staffing, scheduling, and overtime on line 17 there, right? But what you're telling me is, well, we're still going to allow seniority for scheduling, and we're still going to allow overtime as negotiated in contracts. So I took you at your word, and I read while people were, one more caveat now, then I looked at page 29, under applicability of personnel regulations, and it says that there can only be substitution on these if there is specific approval of the assembly. And I was trying to think how the heck that's going to work, because the assembly isn't involved, or won't be, until the very end, and then can only say yes or no. Help me. I'm assuming that's the language you're using to say, yeah, we can do seniority for scheduling.
Let me take it from the back and
Okay, thank you.
Backward. Page 29, specific approval of assembly. The idea being there is when the assembly approves a contract, it is laid out, these are the provisions where we're varying from personnel rules. That it's not hidden, it's not buried in there, and everyone figures that out a year or two